Hi, and welcome back to Tech Talk. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor of Computer World. I'm here with Mike Simon from Macworld, Brandon Butler from Network World, Michael Nadeau from CSO. We're going to talk about everything from Uber and hackers to Google tracking your every move, to my thoughts on Firefox Quantum and what's going on with AWS in China. So stick around. Okay, so Mike, I know you wanted to talk about this. What in the hell is going on with Uber, and why is it paying hackers money? This is not good.
Well, actually, the paying the money, hackers money part isn't really the worst about what happened with the Uber breach. Uber in 2016 had a major data breach that exposed 57 million customer names and 60,000 driver data.
Yeah.
And the company basically did not report it, which is in violation of California law. And also, it's just
stupid.
Yeah, and it doesn't reflect well on the company.
Right.
So and they knew about it, though?
They knew about it. We know the CSO knew about it, and we know the CEO knew about it as well. And rather than report it, they found out who the hackers were, paid them $100,000 to destroy the data. Nobody's really sure if they actually destroyed the data.
How do you trust the hackers to destroy it for you? It makes no sense.
It's basically hush money, huh?
Yeah, but even though the practice is frowned upon, it is considered a honest business decision to do that if that seems to be the most efficient way to protect data or recover
costs. That it doesn't get out there. Yeah.
Pay the ransom.
Right. but the cover up is the big story. So it took a new CEO to come in, find out about it, and say, hey, look, we got to come clean on this. And they're launching their own investigation and trying to get to the bottom of what happened. But what's interesting about this is we just had another significant breach where the company dealt with it in a much different way. And I think it's important to compare and contrast those two. The social media site Imgur in 2014 had a big breach where something like 1.5 million usernames and passwords were compromised. The company didn't know about it until this past Thanksgiving, when a security researcher obtained the data, informed them on Thanksgiving, and in just over 24 hours, Imgur sent out an email to all its users saying, "Hey, look, your data might have been compromised. Here's what you should be doing." They took responsibility for it. They reported it to the appropriate authorities, and they're doing all the right things. As a result, people are feeling a lot better about Imgur right now than they are about Uber.
I would think so. This is the sort of thing that companies, this is going to happen repeatedly. And if companies are trying to build trust among their users or clients, the idea that you would know about a breach and hide it and then pay people, as you say, hush money, versus announcing it publicly, this is what we've done, this is what happened, this is what we're going to do to fix it, I would think speaks volumes. Even if it's legal to pay the hackers, I just wonder if that's really the smartest thing to do financially in the long haul for the company.
Well, law enforcement will tell you not to do it.
Yeah,
because it's just making it's making their business work. That's their business model.
Encouragement for the next round of hackers to do the same thing.
Yeah. And the fact that Uber did this at that rate just is going to you're going to see more of these.
Absolutely.
The story reminds me of the Equifax breach that happened earlier this year, and Equifax waited months before they disclosed the breach as well. It seems like that might have been a little bit of a different circumstance because Equifax, it seemed like they were trying to get their ducks in a row, if I could say that, and figure out what their response was going to be. Uber, it seems like, was trying to make the situation go away and have it not come public. So I think they're very different. Not that Equifax handled anything correctly, but
is it Is it possible that Imgur response was a direct correlation to seeing how Uber was getting beat up in the media over not publicizing this?
It might have been, or just might have been. They just felt it was the right thing to do. But it just goes to the it's a cultural thing, I think. When you're a startup and you've had some success like Uber, you're focused. You've got your foot on the gas. You're going as fast as you can, and you've got a list of priorities that you're going to grow the company and get to a certain point. And then at the bottom of that list of priorities is security.
Right.
So one of the things that's still not clear about the Uber breach is was that personally identifiable information encrypted? They've been kind of dancing around that, so you might assume that no, it wasn't. That's a very basic practice that they should have done.
And we learn more and more that when we think our data is encrypted, it isn't.
Right.
And usually as a result of these hacks.
Yeah. And in the case of the Imgur hack, it was encrypted but using an older algorithm.
You know, it just goes back to the larger point that there just seems to be absolutely no cohesive way, whether it's federal law or California law, of dealing with these things. I mean, there needs to be something on the books that says, you know, if you have this kind of data, you have to have some minimal level of protection, encryption, whatever on it. And if there is a breach, you have to report it. Doesn't California law or some law require companies to report it?
Some states are ahead of the curve, California, New York, but really come next May, it's going to be the EU that kind of sets the standard, at least for companies that do business globally. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, that has pretty strict rules about how you handle personal data, how you report it 72 hours, not just from a confirmed breach, from when you think you've had a breach.
Okay.
So that's going to force a lot of companies to change the way they work with customer and employee data.
Is it likely that being in place, that they will then meet those standards and then apply that to the U.S. even if there's no law here requiring them to do so? I mean, I would think
technically it doesn't make sense to have two different systems.
Right.
So if they have to meet the EU regulations, then they have to set up their entire infrastructure to meet those.
And if they tell the EU, we're going to find out about it.
Right. Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, but there's nothing preventing Congress from having hearings, looking into this, and coming up with our own version of what the EU is doing, right?
And funny you mentioned that, because this morning I was speaking to a privacy lawyer from D.C. about this very topic, and he's saying there's bipartisan support to do something like this around privacy. The problem is that you have all these different agencies who nobody's really sure who owns cyber.
Right.
So they haven't been able to figure out whether it's the FCC, whether it's some intelligence agency or some other organization that owns this. Judiciary.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I think there's another lesson here related to leadership and just sort of Uber overall as a company and the number of black marks that the company has gotten over the last couple of years. And a lot of those go back to the former CEO, Travis Kalanick, and his transgressions and the way he was treating some employees. Right. And I think there's a bigger story here that, it starts from the top at leadership, and there's a right way to handle these situations and a wrong way. And he unfortunately handled a couple different situations now, it seems, in the wrong way.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, the CSO at Uber kind of fell on his own sword and was fired, and it's unclear exactly what his level of involvement there was. But you can just imagine the conversation around Uber when this was discovered. It's like, oh gosh, not another.
Who's got time for
this?
Yeah,
we can't deal with this. Let's just shove it under the rug.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that the thing about it is, I agree with you that it really does start at the top, and it matters, who's running things and how they decide to handle these things,
and what tone they set for the rest of the company.
But all of us should not be basically at the whim of whichever CEO is in charge of whatever company when a breach occurs.
Because can you trust them?
And clearly, I mean, if I had taken an Uber and some of my data was potentially out there and had been destroyed by the hackers, I don't believe that. I just think that sounds crazy. It would make me think twice before using Uber again. Just as for starters.
Well, and I think it also gets back to the point of, I think you have to approach this world with the expectation that your information is going to be compromised, and you need to take your own personal steps to protect your own personally identifiable information, and check your credit reports and monitor your activity and stuff like that. It's just something you have to do in today's age, because you have to assume this could happen to any company, and they may or may not tell you about it.
They should. I mean, for the larger point, they should offer these services for free. I mean, I pay TransUnion $10 a month for my wife and I to make sure we have access to our credit report, and it's not. People don't realize, credit locks. You got to apply these things. You have to pay for these things. You have to monitor these things, and people just aren't educated as much as they should be about what the steps they can personally take to make sure not to necessarily stop it, but to know when it's happening and to mitigate the effects of it.
But isn't part of that, if how would you know something had happened at Uber if Uber had not said anything? And then you wouldn't know to take those steps.
Yeah.
I agreed. It's good. It's important to do that. And I agree that it would be good if they were offered, without you having to pay and go through all these hoops. But once again, we're sort of at the mercy of companies that either decide to release this information and let the world know,
right,
or keep it hidden and hope that it goes away and hope.
But at least I would know, even if I didn't know where it was coming from, I would know if somebody had access to my credit and somebody was doing something nefarious. So.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see if Congress does act on something like this. I think in this current administration, it seems very pro-business friendly. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to find a middle ground to create some national rules, maybe. And taking the EU's example is a place to start.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of switch gears, because we were talking about, Mike and I were talking earlier about this topic of data and information floating around out there in ways that you may not know. So Google's kind of annoyed you. What happened?
With Android, you expect there to be, little bugs and little vulnerabilities that pop up every now and again. But last week or the week before, it came out that Google itself had put something into Android, not just Oreo or Nougat. Like they didn't even say which, but it appears to be going all the way back to even KitKat.
Okay.
Like every phone. And they added something in there that your phone, whether or not there was a SIM card, whether or not you had location services enabled, was still pinging cell towers as you moved
around.
And if you didn't have a SIM card, it would, once it went back to Wi-Fi, it would use it. And so this was in the phone. You had no way to stop it, and you had no way of knowing that it was actually happening. And the way they came out was a report in courts. They kind of dug into the code and into the however they figured it out, but they figured it out, and Google admitted it.
We're talking geolocation information.
Geolocation.
Right? Where
They're
your device is.
using cell towers to triangulate your position, to estimate where you are. And, location services are a big deal on our phone, and most people have them turned on, and most people don't give it a second thought. But some people care about their privacy, particularly Android users, because, they use it because you can do more things with the phone, because you have more control over what it's doing. And now we find out that Google was inserting this, line of code or this, feature, call it, into the operating system itself without telling anybody. And once they were found out, they said, oh, we were just using it to better send messages, as a better way to deliver. And we'll turn it off in the December update. Now, that may be true. If it is true, why didn't you tell everybody? And why didn't you give people an opt-out toggle? Let me turn it off if that's the case, if you are actually doing it. So most people probably didn't hear about this. Most people probably wouldn't even know or care if they did. But the fact that, these companies and, Apple, who knows if they're doing something similar to try to better their system. I mean, I'm all for increasing speed and increasing services and all that. But, we should know what's being what's happening. Location services is one of the biggest ways advertisers and anyone else can track us. You don't realize it because, it's cool when you get a notification that says you parked here in Google Maps. Like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, all right, fine. But Google knows exactly where you are.
Right.
That's going
or
through
like Google
services.
Maps uses that for traffic services, right? Like
right.
I've allowed Google Maps to know my location so that it can tell you if there's traffic on my route home.
Absolutely. And we do it for, I have a lock at my house that
Right.
if I leave a certain radius.
But they should tell you
locks.
if they're doing that.
It's the transparency issue,
Yeah.
which goes back to the Uber thing too. Okay, fine. If you're going to run these tests and be pinging our phones and pinging antennas to figure out where you are, let us know that that's happening and for what purpose it's being that data is being used for.
And the other interesting part of this is they were using cell antennas, which that means Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, they were all either complicit and probably getting some kind of monetary payment for this because they don't just give over their cell towers.
Right.
So I don't know. I have a lot of issues with the story. Mostly that it wasn't reported. It wasn't as major of a story as I thought it was.
And there's actually another news story happening this week that's related to this with the Supreme Court. They're actually hearing a case this week the basic question of it is whether police need a warrant to access information about where you are geolocated via your phone.
Right.
There were a series of bank robberies convenience store robberies, and the police used cell phone data to geolocate the suspect to these robberies.
Right.
And they did it without a warrant. And does that need a warrant? It's a
I
question
mean,
the Supreme
personally,
Court
I would
will
say
do.
absolutely.
It's something. Yeah, I mean that's the thing about it. The age-old problem or issue with phones is being required to unlock them. If the police say you have to unlock your phone, and there's even some conflicting laws where if it's a code, you can be allowed to unlock it, or you can be forced to unlock it. If it's your thumbprint, maybe not, or it could be vice versa. But there's again, this goes back to Congress and laws. Technology has far outpaced our ability to govern it, and we're seeing all of these weird things pop up because there's no regulation and no consensus on what we should be doing. This is, it's prime case of it.
Yep. And in the case of the Supreme Court, in my mind, it's cut and dried. Yes, you should have to get a warrant to use that information.
The argument that I heard against needing a warrant is that think of a cell tower basically being a street light, and anyone can stand at a street light and see who's walking down the street and crossing the street. That's not information that's private information to see someone walking down the street. And so the cell phone is just recording that information, and the companies have this information.
But it's your private device that it's using. A street camera is a public device. Right. When you walk down the street, that's owned by a municipal entity. So that data isn't mine. My phone is mine. When I choose to pay for a service, that service I'm accessing Verizon's data, I'm paying for that. That's fine.
Yeah.
So
legitimate point. I think it'll be very interesting to see where the Supreme Court lands.
Well, and we're gonna, it's only going to get worse because with the explosion in IoT sensors and devices and the ability. We get all of these features and things. Your house unlocks when you walk in. You know where your car is parked. You know how traffic is. The ability to track people in real time offers a lot of convenience, but it also offers a lot of danger. Yeah. If you lived in an authoritarian state, that's not a good thing to have. Absolutely. It's not. It's a feature for them. It's a bug for the people being watched, and without any kind of again consensus laws. And that doesn't mean that the laws can't be broken, and that I'm sure companies will do dumb things, and will be tracking us and all that. But we should at least try to set up some sort of framework to ideally govern how this happens. And I think it's just going to get worse unless and until Congress steps forward. And I don't have a lot of hope of that.
It boils down to just a level of trust. Like, we trust these companies as if they're our friends.
Right.
Apple, Google, Amazon.
Apple loves me.
Yeah, it's true.
It'll take care of me.
They sell us these products that have this, this glossy veneer of, like they talk to us and they're so wonderful. And there is a dark side that.
Well, thank goodness we have people who are keeping these companies' feet to the fire and discovering these bugs and discovering the the Imager hack and letting them know about it.
Absolutely.
It's going to come down to the community doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Switching gears. Now we're going to go to China.
Yes.
and AWS. And what's that's like a fire sale over there?
Well, Amazon didn't want it to be a fire sale, but it is.
Is that a Fire Phone joke?
No.
So one of the really interesting things that's been happening in the public cloud computing market over the last couple of years has been this international expansion. These companies, the new battlefront is being able to open cloud data centers around the world. These companies, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, have built a lot of data centers in the US, and now they're building data centers across Europe. And the big market that they're looking to tap is in Asia, and specifically China. But I'm sure everyone hears about how it's tough to do business in China. And I think this example of what happened last week is a prime example of that. Amazon was forced by the Chinese government to sell the infrastructure that its cloud computing services run on in China. The government mandates that a Chinese company must hold the infrastructure, or at least be a partner of any companies that operate there. And we saw our President Trump, did an Asian trip, and it was talked a lot about the various ways that it's difficult to do business in some of these countries, and I think this is a prime example of that. So Amazon ended up selling the data center infrastructure that runs its cloud to a Chinese company, Beijing Sinet Tech. They're technically an AWS partner, so they had partnered with Amazon, and now they're going to be owning the actual data center footprint that Amazon runs its cloud out of. Amazon still owns the intellectual property of the software and all the services that are offered from it, but the actual hardware is now owned by a Chinese company.
How does that affect the service itself?
So there are some other interesting things that happened because of this. At the same time that this happened, Amazon also stopped allowing you to use a VPN in the Chinese region of its cloud, and so basically you can't use a VPN in their cloud now. And they have some other regulations as well, where in the U.S., if you want to get cloud storage or a virtual machine, literally type in your credit card information, you can have one spun up in literally seconds. In China, you have to be a registered business user and you have to have a license from the government to use these services. So it's a little bit more of a complicated process to turn these things up. And I think the real takeaway here is it's going to be interesting to see how U.S. companies are able to get into the Chinese market and other Asian markets, because there are some hurdles to cross there. And at the same time, these Chinese companies are able to come into the U.S. We see Alibaba and Tencent are both opening data centers in cloud regions in the U.S., and they have a little bit of not a little bit, they have an easier time doing business in the U.S. compared to the U.S. companies doing business there. So
Apple got into some trouble. I think Congress kind of questioned them a little bit because they shut down VPNs in China in the App Store. And most recently, Skype was shut down in China as well. And, it brings to my mind a question. What's the first company that steps up and says, we're taking a stand and we're not going to just follow the rules so we can make
that's given up on a huge market.
That says goodbye to China.
I know, I get it.
The board of directors gets involved, and then share prices fall, and CEOs have to resign.
I get all that. I get it.
It gets ugly. Yeah,
we're talking about human rights violation. We're talking about authoritarian ruling.
Well, I mean, you are talking exactly. I think the underlying issue here is that you've got it's government control over not only the economy but the data and the infrastructure, which, getting back to that sort of 1984 kind of thing, kind of world, there's a lot of data, a lot of important data floating around out there about what people are doing and where they are, and if a government wants to know, it can do so. And I'm not even saying that the U.S. is necessarily any better, because God knows what's being found out about us on a regular basis too. But it is interesting because, you make a good point. Companies looking to go into China have a tough time. And that is a huge market. There's a reason they want to be there. and Chinese companies coming to the U.S. have a much easier time. I mean, which sort of, it's a little bit of an imbalance there. Well, it's a big imbalance there in terms of being able to do business.
Yeah, and I think there are questions on a larger geopolitical scale of, is there anything that can be done about this to try to even the playing field with other international governments? And
I mean, is Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon big enough? If they all
join forces,
they all join forces and said, enough. I mean, they gotta run the world right now. Those four.
Well, at least in North America and Europe, yes, but maybe not there.
China has counterparts to all of those.
That's true.
Right.
So
they don't need them. Right?
They don't need them. It's from their point of view, and there's also the trust issue too. And I don't know that this is the case with AWS, but if you own the if a foreign entity owns the infrastructure and you know all this espionage is going on, high-tech espionage, why have a foreign entity own that big piece of infrastructure where a lot of data goes through it?
Sure. You're just opening yourself up potentially to a lot of problems down the road. Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts on that one? Boy, I tell you, we've gone from hacks and
we always come back to this, the evil cloud corporation.
Evil cloud to the geopolitical stuff. Okay, something a little more perhaps lighthearted. You may have seen that Firefox has come out with a new version of its browser. Maybe most people don't care, but I do tend to float between browsers. I've got Safari on my Mac, I've got Safari on the phone, I've got Firefox and Chrome, and so I wanted to see if any of you other than me have tried Firefox Quantum yet, and if so, what you think of it. And if you haven't, that's totally fine, because I'll tell you what I think.
I have not yet. I'm a Chrome guy and Safari on my phone.
Chrome and Safari, that's it. You don't even think about it.
Nope.
Michael, any?
I have not tried it. Chrome user, but not terribly happy with it.
Oh, really? How come?
It's a resource hog.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good point. Yep. Good point. And you? No.
Yeah. No. I tried it. Yeah. I tried it on my desktop. I have it installed. I just force a habit. Safari's always open on my MacBook.
Yep.
And it's really just training me to go to. I gave up on Firefox years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, back when Safari first came out in 2004 or something like that.
I was 4 or 5 maybe. Yeah.
I mean, it was okay. Firefox was clearly the faster and the better engine, but Safari's gotten better. All these, I mean, we've reached kind of a level playing field.
Well, that's sort of why I brought it up, because it's interesting that Firefox for a while had about, I think, 25% of the user share back about 2 years ago. And then gradually, as Chrome has just grown and grown and grown, both on the Mac side, on the Windows side,
and Chromebooks, obviously,
Chromebooks, yeah, very much so, and on Android. It sort of surprised me that there are browser wars. It's not really a war because Chrome won, but that there are still these browsers out there positioning themselves. And so having seen, I hadn't used Firefox in a while. I tended to be Safari Chrome. I downloaded Quantum and was actually pleasantly surprised at how quick it is. I mean, it is noticeably speedier than the old Firefox, certainly on par with Safari and Chrome. Nicely redesigned UI.
Was that on a laptop or?
No, it's on my iMac desktop.
Desktop.
I wouldn't have it on my my iPhone. I'm just Safari there because it's just sort of designed to work there. I mean, I've played with Chrome on the phone.
Apple doesn't give that access to the.
There's no reason to have another browser because it's still going to use the underlying rendering engine. But I just thought it was interesting that Firefox is still firing shots in the war. Maybe it's the last couple of shots before a truce is declared. But anyway,
you got to think that there's a big enough market out there for a couple browsers if they're at a capable enough level.
Well, Firefox has this deal, through the search engine that it's getting money coming in. So, I mean, the more people it gets on Firefox, the more money it brings in. And it certainly has enough money to keep going for the next several years. I like the idea that there is still innovation going on. I mean, I don't want to just settle for the fact that it's an Apple, Google world.
Sure.
And so if you've got upstarts, like if you consider Firefox an upstart, I guess not. But if you've got other companies out there that are still looking to make the browsing experience either faster, more secure, better in some way, I think that's a good thing.
Competition's good.
competition is good, and I mean we are not paying for these browsers directly, so it's not like a real capitalist kind of fight. But
so I should download it. I should give it a try.
You should give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah,
give
it doesn't cost you anything. Might as well.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny to think that if not for Internet Explorer, your iPhone probably wouldn't exist today. That you love so much.
Tell me more.
Well, back in '97, I think it was '96 and '97. Bill Gates, invested a bunch of money in Apple, and they installed Internet Explorer as a default operating system.
They were trying to do an in-run around Netscape.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Netscape?
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
But that influx of cash, that really saved up, and also the even putting IE on the Mac helped spread the influence a little bit more. But if not for that, Apple might have gone under. Steve Jobs or no Steve Jobs, Apple was in a rough place.
I remember that.
Rough place.
Yeah. So
then the iMac came, and then the rest is all history. But
thanks, Microsoft.
They really Apple fans have a debt. They owe a debt to Bill Gates and Microsoft. Absolutely.
I still remember the video of Steve Jobs turning around.
They booed him.
Well, he was
Bill Gates showed up on the screen, and the crowd booed.
Yeah. It looked a little bit like that 1984 ad. It did. It was kind of weird. All right, good. All right, well, I think we've sort of run the gamut today from browsers to geopolitics to hacks. So I want to say thanks to Mike, and Brandon for being here. I'm Ken Mingus. Now you know what we know.